This way, a few steps. Okay, that's right.
Okay.
Right. Hey, no, please.
You're stepping on something.
Nobody move. There is a bomb.
Hi, do you speak English?
Oh, thank God.
Yes, we have an emergency.
The tale begins in the scenic country of Georgia. A truck is climbing a hill, carrying 3 friends. Chris and a couple, Daniel and Alicia, who are off for a walk. Daniel hops out of the truck first to inspect their camping spot. Chris whispers to Alicia about revealing their secret love to Daniel, but Alicia refuses because she and Daniel are set to marry on Saturday. The secret is that Chris and Alicia are secretly dating behind Daniel's back. Daniel signals it's time to start their walk. They follow him and embark on their hike. As they walk, they discuss how the mountain was once a battlefield. There are many hidden bombs left by soldiers during the war. They discover a large stone at the hill's peak. The trio climbs up, and Daniel asks Chris to officiate their wedding because he believes love is more important than a grand ceremony. And having Chris there is enough. They are all taken aback, especially Chris, who has feelings for Alicia, but he commences the wedding because his best friend requested it. However, in the middle of the ceremony, Chris stops speaking, leaving Daniel and Alicia disappointed as they are nearly done. Chris admits he feels strange, and then he departs. As night falls and the stars appear, they start their evening by lighting a fire. Daniel persistently asks Chris what's wrong, but he doesn't respond. Daniel begins to get frustrated with Chris's nonsensical replies. That's when he stands up to argue with Chris, but Alicia intervenes and proposes a toast instead. Chris and Daniel cease their quarrel. When Daniel and Alicia are about to retire to their tent, Chris finally concludes the wedding, declaring them husband and wife. The couple is joyous and tipsy as they enter their tent. Daniel begins to kiss Alicia and undress her. Alicia asks Daniel to close the tent because Chris can see them, and Chris is observing them and feeling heartbroken. Daniel and Alicia continue their intimate moment, and Chris extinguishes the fire. As the sun begins to rise, Chris awakens from a deep sleep in his tent. He notices a man rummaging through Daniel and Alicia's belongings. He slowly rises and approaches the man, initiating a confrontation. They argue, and Chris tussles with the strange man until Daniel and Alicia arrive. Chris was unaware that the stranger was Devi, Daniel's friend, who assists hikers. The tension between them begins to dissipate, and Chris apologizes for his actions. Devi forgives him immediately, stating he would have done the same. Devi returns to the truck and retrieves Alicia's camera, proposing he take a picture of the 3 of them. The trio agrees and prepares for the photo. Devi instructs them to adjust slightly due to the angle. He gradually guides them to the left, where the backdrop looks spectacular. Until the unexpected occurs, Chris steps on a hidden bomb. Devi becomes anxious and instructs him not to move an inch. Daniel and Alicia start to panic because they don't know what to do, but Devi assures them that he will fetch help from the town, although it will take 4 hours. When they ask him how long, he starts to walk away. Daniel shouts at him to hurry as the panic among the 3 escalates. Alicia and Daniel retreat behind the large stone, discussing what to do about Chris and not abandon him. Then, Daniel's phone rings, giving hope of a signal. Daniel communicates with the person on the other end, requesting a helicopter and bomb experts. As he's about to end the call, he mentions that he will inform Alicia that they're not rescuing Chris anyway. Alicia is stunned and doesn't comprehend what Daniel is implying. Then he becomes irate, returns to Chris, and confronts them both. Alicia was oblivious to the fact that Chris had disclosed everything to Daniel. They both apologize to him, but it's too late. They discover that Daniel had orchestrated everything from the beginning. The call was a ruse because there was no signal to begin with, and Devi had planted the bomb. Daniel is livid, irrational, and filled with loathing for both of them. He rejects their apologies, starts packing his belongings, and abandons them too. He retreats to a stone distant from the bomb where Devi had gone, and invites him to drink beer and have some fun. On the other side, Alicia is attempting to figure out how to disarm the bomb. She locates the pin that Daniel had flung far away. She also begins to dig for a backup plan, which involves Chris leaping away from his current position when the bomb detonates. They are formulating the plan together until a peculiar local man approaches them. They request his assistance in digging the ground. The man, named Ilya, and his dog approach them in a panic, believing a crime is taking place. He fires a gunshot, and fortunately, no one is injured. They explain their predicament and desperately ask for help. Ilya questions Alicia about her relationship with Chris, who is not her husband. She is reluctant to share the story, but Ilya insists on knowing the truth to help. Chris begins to get angry, But since Alicia needs his assistance, she reveals everything about their clandestine affair. Now that Ilya is aware, he insults her, which provokes Chris to lash out and berate Ilya. Ilya begins to touch Alicia as the argument persists, but Chris pleads with him not to touch Alicia. Ilya consents to help them, but demands something in return. He desires a special moment with Alicia alone, but both refuse, offering him their belongings instead. Ilya agrees and begins to rummage through their items. He finds Alicia's underwear and presents them to his dog to sniff. He states that to help, he wants Alicia's underwear, the one she is currently wearing. Chris is now enraged, but has no choice as their lives are in jeopardy. Chris informs Ilya that he has $360 in his pocket and a credit card. Ilya accepts both, but states he doesn't want American dollars. He wants her underwear instead. Alicia has no choice but to comply, and as she is descending to her tent, Ilya halts her and demands that she undress in his presence. She hesitates initially, but complies with his request. When she's holding her underwear, she hands them to Ilya, and he accepts them gleefully, sniffing them as if they were fresh. Now that Ilya has obtained what he desires, he begins to assist them by digging, but he inquires about her exact instructions. Alicia explains that the hole must be 2 feet away and deep enough for Chris to jump into. As he digs, a radio rings from Ilya's bag. Chris and Alicia feel a glimmer of hope and ask him to call for help immediately. He retrieves his bag and converses with a friend named Sergei. He mentions that the soup is ready, but he's assisting 2 stranded Americans. Alicia is desperate to use the radio, but as Chris grows impatient, he frequently curses at Ilya, which offends him. He threatens to withdraw his help if they refuse to cooperate. Alicia pleads with Ilya to lend the radio, but he always demands something in return. Alicia was desperate and impatient. She told Ilya that Chris was in danger and that there was no time for games. Ilya seemed like he was about to let her use his radio, but then he threw her panties and demanded that she fetch them like a dog. Alicia was furious but had no choice. Ilya insisted she crawl like a dog to get them. Though it was humiliating, she got on her knees, lay down, and crawled to retrieve the panties. She grabbed them with her hands, but Ilya said dogs use their mouths. Alicia, frustrated, crawled back, bit the panties, and brought them to Ilya. With the radio finally in her hands, Alicia started speaking, but the person on the other end couldn't understand English. She asked Ilya to help translate. He agreed, but only if they played a game where Alicia had to undress for every word he translated. Alicia was outraged and refused, telling him to get lost. She picked up the shovel and started digging herself. Ilya warned her that his friend Sergei, who was on the radio, was worried about him. Alicia, scared but determined, told Sergei that Ilya was fine, even though Sergei didn't understand English. Ilya took control, forcing Alicia to undress while he talked to Sergei. Alicia began taking off her clothes while Chris begged Ilya to stop the game. Ilya got angry, grabbed his bag, and walked away, but not before pointing out that Sergei was still talking about the soup. Alicia, infuriated, didn't care anymore. Ilya then aimed his shotgun at Alicia, causing Chris to negotiate with him while Alicia ran away. Ilya ordered his dog to chase her, and he followed in anger. Chris saw an opportunity to grab the shotgun Ilya had left behind. He picked up the chain Daniel had thrown earlier and strategized to get the gun. Successfully, Chris pointed the gun at Ilya, who was now holding Alicia hostage with a knife. The 2 men cursed at each other, filled with rage. Ilya began to hurt Alicia, cutting her neck and causing her to bleed. Chris hesitated to shoot, fearing he might hit Alicia. Ilya took advantage of the situation, dragging Alicia behind a rock and forcing her to undress. Alicia screamed in pain and disgust as Ilya assaulted her. Chris, unable to shoot, watched helplessly. When Ilya grew tired, Alicia tried to crawl away. She hit Ilya with a rock, making him dizzy. Chris shouted for her to come to him, ready to pull the trigger, but the dog attacked him, causing him to faint. Half conscious, Chris heard Ilya reveal that the landmine was fake and that they were never in real danger. Chris woke up next to a severely injured Alicia, who was fighting for her life. He screamed for help, but no one came. Days later, in a nearby Georgian suburb, a family was at home. A young American tourist, Chris, knocked on their door, asking for help because he was lost. He couldn't use his GPS and asked for directions or an old map. The mother, Tanya, offered to print a map for him. Chris accepted their hospitality and went inside. As Chris waited, he noticed a bee farm in the distance where Ilya was working. Ilya, hearing his dog bark, came to investigate. He was shocked to see Chris inside the house. Uncomfortable, Ilya told Chris he would take him to the city. Chris, however, asked for more food, which angered Ilya, leading to a heated argument. Chris followed Ilya outside, agreeing to wait for 15 minutes while Ilya talked with his family. Ilya unleashed his dog to follow Chris. Minutes later, Chris returned, holding the bleeding dog and claiming it was an accident. Ilya, furious, grabbed his shotgun, but Chris revealed his gun was loaded. Chris shot Ilya in the legs, causing Tanya and Lika to come out and see what had happened. Terrified, they asked Chris what they could do. Chris demanded they follow his orders, or he would shoot them. He told Lika to tie up her mother and carry her father to a room, then ordered her to undress and crawl like a dog, mirroring Ilya's earlier demands. Ilya offered Chris money to stop, but Chris refused. Instead, he made Lika play a game called Stripper's Roulette, where she had to undress and risk being shot. Ilya and Tanya pleaded, but Chris was determined to avenge Alicia. As tensions escalated, Chris accidentally shot Lika in the head, killing her instantly. Shocked and horrified, Chris realized he had taken an innocent life in his quest for revenge. The movie ends with Chris in disbelief and sorrow, having lost his lover and now responsible for another tragedy. And with that, the movie ends. I hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for amazing videos. See you in the next one.